Celeste is like a modern take of an arcade platformer. Originally, I bought this game back in March off of the back of beating another great game called Ori and the Blind Forest, of which, by the way, its sequel has been announced, so now more than ever is a pretty great time to give it a try. Where other platformers take a more passive approach, restricting your moves early on, Celeste instead gives you full functionality from the beginning. Initially, I found this very unforgiving, attempting the same jump hundreds of times until I found a way to make my dumbass ideas work. I'm much more familiar with the genre now after beating Ori, Hollow Knight and Cuphead, so I think it's fair for me to at least rank myself as average in terms of skill. And yeah, some jumps would have me stuck for a solid 20 minutes, just because in my mind I'd figured out a way to beat a level doesn't necessarily mean that my hands agreed. It's this mastery over obstacles that kept the game interesting for me. A lot of modern games now rely more on a strong narrative and less on the gameplay. Take the Telltale games for example. They're more like interactive stories. Left.
I thought I was done with them,
Right.
but they're not done with me.
What you can do is limited, but the captivating narratives have pioneered an entirely new genre of gaming. E. Q! In my opinion, Celeste has managed to achieve the complete polar opposite. Every obstacle is fair and yet somehow infuriating. Typically there is always at least one really obvious way to pass each level, but I as a player insist on spending hours on the way that seems most impossible. This is why I feel like Celeste is initially so much fun. To watch someone play through the entirety of this game would be a massive disservice to yourself, as you cheat yourself out of the learning experience. Even if you are the worst player in the world, you'll still have fun in your failure when trying to figure out what works and what doesn't. When you're this bad as a player, you'll revel in those moments when you're flying through uncharted territory, just hoping for the best and seeing if you're able to somehow put it all together. There are so many memorable sections of this game, with each area offering something new for the player to experiment with. Things like the classic dash, the blocks you can move through, and the golden feathers. Still, with all you're presented with, I feel like Celeste is just barely the tip of the iceberg for what it's capable of. It's clean, it's fun, and it looks great. With a completion time of only 8 hours, it doesn't linger or stagnate. This game is non-stop fun from the beginning to the end, and I would recommend it to any fan of a 2D platformer. All this being said, every game is not without its flaws. While every hurdle seemed tried and tested, I wish there were more options for how a player chooses to tackle each level. The mechanics are there for a great foundation, but some sections of the game just seemed less inspired than others. My favourite part of the game, for example, was fucking awesome. It took parts of the original level away as you progressed, which constantly rearranged the main room and would change what you're able to access. In other areas, the lack of challenge in figuring out the way forward hampered on my involvement, and therefore my enjoyment of the game. This issue becomes much less prominent as you move past Chapter 5, but broke my immersion early on, causing me to become disassociated with the story. For me, Celeste was a bit too sentimental. I didn't think of it much of an issue until around Chapter 5, when the story goes from slightly metaphorical to "fuck you, this game is now a physical representation for how we all feel on the inside." Don't get me wrong, I can appreciate emotion, but for me things just came on a bit too heavy-handed, especially when you're noticing that the game is becoming less inspired. Having the main character bitch about their internal issues can just be pretty jarring. The story lost me at the Mirror Palace, and after taking away all of the progress I had made when the main character falls, I almost stopped playing this game entirely. Had it not been for this game's amazing fluidity and feel, I doubt I would have finished the game. Celeste was not the game that I thought it would be when I initially set out to complete it, and this is mainly due to its narrative. Though it didn't appeal to me, I'm sure that others will really relate to the struggles of which the main character endures and may appreciate this aspect of the game more than I did. This also being said, I was expecting there to be more characters. You meet this random guy fairly early on, and I thought to myself that this is going to be one of those games where you meet loads of different wacky characters who are also on a mission to reach the top of the mountain. While this is partly true, Celeste fails to build on your associates, which I feel is just untapped potential. At some point, there was clearly a creative decision to focus more on a personal narrative that I feel is somewhat of a hindrance on the experience as a whole. I would have preferred it if the game had showed me a story in the background, as opposed to forcing me to acknowledge it so much. I can only recommend Celeste if you're already a fan of other 2D platformers. When the phone guy said this, I had to shut it off. I'm sorry. Goodbye.